My kids have a new favorite phrase. It's 3 words, and they say it to me almost every day. They're the 3 magical words that every parent loves to hear. That's not fair. I forgot to mention that most of the time when they say it, they're shouting, and it's usually right after an argument they've had with one of their siblings or with me, and it's just the best. I'm sure you catch my sarcasm there. But as much as it drives me crazy when my kids say that, I get it. I said the same thing when I was their age. And it's so interesting to me that all of us have this idea of fairness hardwired into us. We believe, for whatever reason, that life should be fair. Now, I'll never forget one time when I was in high school, when I was arguing with my dad, and I yelled, "Dad, that's not fair!" And I don't even remember what we were arguing about, but I'd probably done something wrong and he had punished me. We were in my room, and after I yelled that at him, he looked me dead in the face, and he started just picking up stuff from my room. He grabbed my car keys and put it in his pocket. Then he took the sheets and pillows off my bed and threw them in the hallway. He even took one of the pillowcases off my pillow and started filling it with things on my desk, my video games and my controllers, basically everything that was in my room. Without a word, he was just cleaning me out. It was crazy. Finally, after getting over the shock of what was happening, I stopped and I was like, "Dad, what are you doing? You can't just take all of my things." And he said, "Do you think life should be fair?" To which I responded, "Yeah, I do." "Great. Then I'm gonna give all of your things away to kids who are less fortunate than us, and we're gonna try to make life fair for the people around us." Boom. Mic drop. Talk about an epic dad move. I was completely put in my place. Eventually, my mom found out what he was doing and she let me keep my things, but I've never forgotten that lesson. That's when I realized that life isn't actually fair. Even after that day, I've still approached life with the same attitude that I think most of us share. It's like there are 2 sides battling it out, the fair side and the unfair side. You know, when someone at work gets a promotion over you, that can feel unfair. When your own kid doesn't make the sports team that you think they should have made, that seems unfair. When you never seem to catch a break, that seems unfair. Or like when your neighbors go on an epic family vacation that your family could never dream of or afford, that seems unfair. But then there's the other side too, you know? When you see one of your coworkers who always comes in late and finally gets caught by the boss, that feels fair. Feels like they're getting what they deserve. Or when the kid that didn't invite your kid to their birthday party, somehow gets a little sick, maybe a little chicken pox, you're like, "Yeah, that's what you get." All right, maybe that one feels a little mean, but don't act like you haven't thought about something like that. Or get this, when a car recklessly speeds past you on the highway, and you later see that same car pulled over by the police, all feels right in the world. My point is this, we like it when people get what they deserve, but we don't like it when they get what they don't deserve. And sometimes we even attach this fairness concept to God. We want God to give people what they deserve. But at the same time, we don't want to get what we deserve. We don't even want to acknowledge what we deserve. All of a sudden, if we want God to be fair with everyone, we become just like my high school self with my dad. And we realize that we may not like what fairness really looks like. Over the past few weeks, we've talked about some of the most famous things Jesus said during his time on earth before he was crucified. This week, we're gonna look at something Jesus said after he came back to life, but before he went back to his Father in heaven. Jesus had 12 main people who traveled with him throughout his ministry. And those people are referred to as the 12 disciples. And then you would have assumed that they'd be model citizens, right? Wrong. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, one of the disciples who seemed to get quite a bit wrong was this guy named Peter. He was constantly speaking out of turn. He was rash, he made bad decisions, and he seemed to always act without thinking. He was your classic, ready, fire, aim type of guy. One of these situations happened right before Jesus died. Let's look at an exchange between Jesus and Peter on the night that Jesus was arrested. Then Jesus told them, "This very night you will all fall away on account of me, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Peter replied, "Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will." "Truly, I tell you," Jesus answered, "this very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And all the other disciples said the same. This was probably the boldest thing Peter ever said. He pledged his allegiance to Jesus. He was saying he would face torture and death with Jesus. He said that no matter what happened, he was going to ride or die with Jesus. But let's fast forward to see what happens at the end of the very same chapter after Jesus was arrested. Now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. "You also were with Jesus of Galilee," she said. But he denied it before them all. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Then he went out to the gateway, where another servant girl saw him and said to the people there, "This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." He denied it again with an oath, "I don't know the man." After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, "Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away." Then he began to call down curses, and he swore to them, "I don't know the man." Immediately, a rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken. "Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. Brutal, isn't it? Peter promised that he would never leave Jesus. And then he did exactly what Jesus predicted he would. He even went as far to claim that he never knew Jesus. Now, what would a fair response from Jesus look like? Probably disowning him, right? It would have been totally fair for Jesus to completely turn his back on Peter. I mean, that's what Peter did to him, but that's not Jesus. After he came back to life, Jesus visited Peter, and this was their conversation. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." Instead of being angry and judgmental about Peter's betrayal, Jesus responded with love. Instead of demoting him to world's worst disciple, Jesus promoted Peter to be an ambassador for Christ. For each denial, Jesus gave Peter an invitation. For every wrong, Jesus offered him grace and love and a warm welcome back into his arms. And it was completely unfair. But that's part of the good news about Jesus. He is completely unfair. He gives us what we don't deserve. God's grace is unfairly good. As we follow Jesus, we're going to mess up. And when we do, you and I have a tendency to assume that we'll get what's fair and what we deserve. We assume we'll be kicked out, or at least we assume we have to take a little time out from our faith. Maybe you take a few days away from reading your Bible after you've been too harsh with your kids. Or maybe you stay away from church, after making a couple of poor decisions. Or maybe you'll go as far as fasting or doing something really religious to make up for some way that you think you've sinned. I'm not saying you decide you quit your faith when you mess up. I'm just saying you and I are tempted to shrink back, maybe step away or take time off from our faith. We're tempted to think we no longer qualify for being called a Christian or a church person or a God person. And that would be true if the circumstances were fair, but they're not. God is better than that. God has more in mind for you and for me than what we deserve. Sin has consequences, but God is never keeping you at a distance relationally because of something you've done. So you don't have to distance yourself either, because God's grace is unfairly good. So what does that mean for us? Well, like Peter, we're going to do wrong things. If not today, then likely tomorrow. That's because sin is inevitable. But our response to sin is optional. The right response to sin is to run right back to God. When we say that God's grace is unfair, we mean that we get to go right back to Him the moment we mess up. The very instant we sin, we can know that we're forgiven. And God invites us to be in a relationship again with Him. And that leads to the second part of our response. Once we accept God's grace, it's our gift to go and extend the same unfairly good grace to others. That means that when others wrong us or seem to get away with something, we offer the same unfair grace that we've experienced. Think about one person in your life that you've had a hard time extending grace toward. Who's the one person that you get a pit in your stomach when you even think about them? This week, I want you to mentally offer them grace. Grace in your response or your reaction toward them. We don't want to experience fairness. We don't really want to get what we deserve. What we want is unfair. We want to experience grace. Life is unfair, and that's a good thing, because that means we get God's unfair grace every day of our lives, and we get to give that and extend that same grace to others. Imagine what your life would look like if you believed that God wasn't angry at you when you made a mistake. Imagine how it would lift the weight off your shoulders, that God isn't going to abandon you. He loves you greatly, and He is a God who forgives you and is always welcoming you with open arms. And that's not fair. That's grace. And that's yours today.